Okay, welcome to week 14 of Whiteboard Wednesday. I'm going to have a little bit of a different approach today. I'm going to focus on a particular aspect which get a lot of questions about, and probably when you're asked to give talks at different times, this is the area where you're most likely to be asked to speak about, and it's probably the area most difficult to in fact describe, and it is the notion of leadership. And I talk about it as a notion rather than a reality, and mainly because people notionally like the idea of being a leader, but in regard to what it actually means to be one within any organisation, the responsibility that comes with that is a whole lot different. In terms of leadership, the reason I thought about it was that we played a draw on the weekend, and interestingly that I've been involved directly in AFL football since 1982, and it was actually the first draw that I've been involved with. And when I sent out a little tweet to that effect, I got one back from someone in Perth, and who reminded me that in fact I was part of a draw, and that was when the siren didn't ring loud enough or long enough at Aurora Stadium one day in Launceston, where in fact the game did finish with the scores tied, but 3 days later the AFL chose to, after obviously a lot of work and a lot of consideration, and made a very courageous decision at that stage to change the result of the game, and Fremantle were given the points on that occasion. And the reason I thought about leadership was just as a result of how you respond to a draw, but how the club, Fremantle, at that stage, responded to that game. And one of the interesting things was that when I referred to leadership was that often, and the most important part of leadership is when it comes from areas where and parts of the organisation where sometimes you least expect it, but it actually has the most impact. And an interesting thing came out of that game. When there was all the confusion immediately after the game as to what had actually happened, was that we came back into the rooms and there was a lot of angst and a lot of negativity and a lot of people who, as you would imagine, wasn't a lot of emotional maturity happening at the club at that time. There was a guy who was the conditioning coach of the club at the time, a fellow by the name of Ben Tarbox, and he actually yelled out at the top of his voice as the players were sort of slumped around in different parts. He said, "Okay, guys, we've got to start the warm down. We got playing the West Coast Eagles in 6 days' time, and as you'd imagine, Fremantle versus the West Coast, big game. Both teams were going well at the time. West Coast went on and won the premiership, and Fremantle finished top 4, so it was a massive game at that time. We're playing the Eagles in 6 days' time. We can't change what just happened there, but we can get on with getting ourselves sorted." And it took a lot of responsibility, and the guys didn't move that quickly initially, but he got them going and immediately refocused the playing group. But not only did he refocus the playing group, he actually set an example for those who had the more position power leadership roles, including the president, Rick Hart, and myself as CEO. Chris Connolly was coach. That it actually got us focused as well. And what it showed to me at the time was the club was in a good space, because there were people who were prepared to show leadership when they didn't necessarily have a title which actually suggested it. And that brings me back to what I see as one of the critical components of leadership, and it's just this simple notion of modelling behaviour. That if you're not prepared to model behaviour as a leader of any organisation, don't ever seek to take that role. And one of the critical components of that is understanding yourself well enough to know whether in fact you can actually show the emotional maturity at different times. And the emotional maturity as a leader is critical, because if you actually are losing your head at a time when everyone's under pressure or anyone's under stress, well, how do you expect everyone else to think clearly at that time? And it's clarity of thought in and around those moments, which I think is a key part of it. And so therefore the modelling of behaviour, though, doesn't necessarily restrict people who don't necessarily have a leadership title at that stage from showing leadership. And the same expectations happen in and around the playing group, that we have the same expectations of the modelling of behaviour of a young player as we do a senior player. It is quite okay for a player to go to James McDonald and say, mate, we expect better in this particular area. Obviously, the fact that James is James and he's a leader of the organisation should not mean that someone wouldn't feel comfortable about giving him feedback at any stage. The chances are he's going to be less likely to need it because of his experience and the fact that he's very well respected within the group, and is less likely to require that feedback, but it doesn't mean the feedback shouldn't be there. And so the notion of then modelling behaviour gets me onto the next phase, and the thing I wanted to actually talk about is that the notion of modelling something then has to refer and give yourself some context from which you actually do it. And one of the challenges that I like to set people who are trying to establish or develop at least respect with any sort of group, which is ultimately what you're seeking from a leader, is trying to build for yourself what we call a trademark. And the trademark, it has the obvious connotations in terms of what a trademark is in regard to business or a product, or it's the thing which actually defines it in one way or another. So how I describe a trademark within the context of a group was that if you were to leave that group tomorrow, what would be the enduring human characteristic you would have liked to have left with that group? And it's not stuff like, oh, he's a good bloke, or he's great to have a beer with, or he's good fun, he's got great humour, although all of those things can be and are important within building a rapport with the group. It's the underlying human characteristic that you'd like to actually be left with. And I'll come back in a moment to actually what my own trademark is, but we then will ask, and I'm going to go through a bit of an exercise with our own staff, where we start to get to people and say, okay, you tell me about what your personal trademark is. I want you to think about it, and you should be able to describe it in just a few words or in half a sentence about what it is that you would like to be known within the group for. And that then becomes, once you've given a public display, or you've explained yourself publicly as to what in fact your trademark is, well, that becomes then a reference point for how people expect you to behave as well. So if you're going to stand up and going to say, oh, I'm going to be there for you, and you show that you aren't going to be there for people, or you're the least likely to turn up when there's some hard work or roll up your sleeves, well, that creates a gap in perception which will be very, very difficult to overcome, particularly once you've pronounced what your actual trademark is.